Hi everybody, my name's Dick Trask. I work for the town of Danvers as Town Archivist. I get to be able to find, collect, and catalog all of the history on paper or a paper byproduct that has to do with the history of the town of Danvers, or when we used to be known as Salem Village. And we're located in the Peabody Institute Library in the Danvers Archival Center and have one of the most wonderful local collections that are significant in American history because, as you know, Salem Village was the place that in 1692 the Salem witchcraft occurred. And once we get over the COVID experience right now, I invite you to come down to the archives and see some of our material. One of the most recent items that we got was a gift from an author who wrote this book. Nancy Sanders wrote this new children's book called The Very Oldest Pear Tree. And what she did was, we had many conversations. She sent me the text where I looked over, made sure it was historically accurate. And she also used our website, which you should take a look at sometime. It's the Peabody Institute Library website. I think its address is danverslibrary.org. And if you look at it, click onto the archives, and you see a very extensive history of the Endicott Pear Tree. It's called What a Pear. And we also have a number of other illustrations that you'll be able to see, some of which I'll show you in just a few minutes. Danvers has a very rich and wonderful history. We've already shown you, or you'll be seeing, our witchcraft memorial. You're going to be hearing about the Endicott Pear Tree, a national treasure, and several other items in Danvers which are very important and very interesting. History is a fun thing because it's about people, and if you like people and you like stories, especially dramatic stories, it's a fun thing to take a look at. So please visit our website, visit the Danvers Historical Society, which collects all of the objects that are important to Danvers history. And you live in a very special community, and you should take advantage of all of its resources. Here we are on a windy plain off of Endicott Street. Endicott Street, as you know, is now a very busy commercial and industrial place. And we're on a property that from the 1940s on was an industrial site. And if you want to take a look around where we are, we're basically in a large parking lot. There used to be a huge building behind us. And why don't you just pan around to show where we are. Mass General Hospital now has a large medical center here, and there are a number of other buildings. We're next to a large nursing home complex, and there's almost acre upon acre of parking spaces. And just below me, behind me, you can get a glimpse of what's basically in a dish bowl, a fence with an old tree. And we're actually standing in an area that is a National Historic Monument. And that is a tree that's been here for part of, or entirely, 5 centuries of American history. This tree called the Endicott Pear Tree was planted sometime around 1632 to 1640 by the first governor of Massachusetts, Governor John Endicott. And it has survived. It's a actual living link with the first European settlers who came to this new world. And it's just a remarkable thing that we have something still alive that was here from the time of the Puritans, the time of the witchcraft, the time of the American Revolution, the American Civil War, industrial America, World War I, World War II, and it's still a living link honoring a heritage that is very important. And I can't overemphasize how significant this is. This pear tree is actually the oldest cultivated tree in the Western Hemisphere. What we're going to do is talk a little bit about it and how it got to be where it is. And why don't we begin by talking about the original settler. And I've got some pictures here, which I'll try to let you take a look at. And the first one is of Governor John Endicott, born 1588, died 1665. And John Endicott came with about 70 settlers in 1628 aboard the Abigail and landed in a place called Naumkeag. And Naumkeag is now called Salem because a few years after he came here, he decided to rename the property in the name of peace, which in Hebrew is the word shalom, or today Salem. And Endicott came with the first 70 settlers, and they were followed in 1630 by a huge migration of other Puritan settlers. Endicott, because he was the first governor, was granted by the colonial legislature 300 acres in this part of what's now Danvers-Port. And he built a cow house, a home, and a number of other ancillary buildings right here. As a matter of fact, someplace on this property was his original house, now probably the remnants of which are about 30 feet under the parking lot we have here. And one of the other things he did while he was here was he imported apples and pears, very important fruit that was used for cider, or in the case of pears, something called perry. And that was a drink that the colonials often imbibed with. They didn't eat pears and apples raw very much, but they did use them for drinks. And he planted a whole bunch of pears and apples here. But near his homestead, he planted a couple pear trees. This is the one that survives. Out of all of the hundreds of apple and pear trees that he planted, this is the only one that survives. And over at Danvers Town Hall, we have a mural in the foyer which represents John Endicott planting the pear tree. It's a mural that was done in the 1930s by a fellow by the name of Dick Ellery and Saul Levinson. And 3 of the original 20 murals are still at Town Hall, and you can see them today. And here you have Endicott. He probably didn't plant it himself, but he had some of his workmen do it, planted the pear tree, and there's a representation of it. The tree survived. As a matter of fact, pear trees tend to be able to live for maybe even a couple hundred years. But this house, this tree, actually has survived now almost 5 centuries. And Endicott became governor of Massachusetts for 16 other years. He was the longest serving governor of Massachusetts in its history. And he served as governor over about 3 different decades, being a 1-year or a 2-year term, and then someone else would be governor, and then he would again. And Endicott's quite an unusual man. And then his house was lost. The tree was kind of out there, and people didn't pay much attention to it until around the late 1700s, when people started going, well, this is a tree that stood in front of Endicott's property, and look how old it is. And it became kind of an iconic item that was memorialized by a lot of people. A doctor from Salem sent some of the pears to John Adams, former president of the United States. And along with it, he sent a note that said, because of your status, you can eat with your ancestors, meaning those from the 17th century. People like Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote about it. This pear tree has been written up in books, magazines, postcards, videos for centuries. And it survives many things that happened. You know, when I was a young kid in the 1950s, there used to be an ad on TV about Timex watches. And they had a line in the ad that says, Timex watch. It takes a licking but keeps on ticking. Meaning that the watch was able to be put in water and it would still function. It would be able to be dropped and it still would function. Well, this is something that term is very good to include for this pear tree, because this pear tree has been through a lot. It's withstood hurricanes in 1770, 1802, 1815, 1939, and 2 hurricanes in 1954. And in many cases, the tree looked like it was destroyed, but it came back. It also has endured a whole bunch of century snowstorms, being neglected. Cattle used to roam here, and the cattle used to like to chip at the bark of the tree. It wasn't protected with a fence until sometime in the late 1820s. Early on in the 20th century, because the soil was so good here, the person who owned this property decided to get rid of all of the topsoil and sell it. So this tree, which was in an expanse that was just by itself, was very lonely, not having good soil. It also, in 1964, was the victim of vandalism. Some little kid came to this tree and cut off every single branch just because of hooliganism. And it was a story that went around the country. Associated Press, United Press International wrote about it, that this was the end of the famous Endicott Pear Tree. They tried to graph it, the graphs didn't hold, and they figured, well, 1964, it lasted till then. But in 1965, little sprouts grew on the tree, And within another generation, it was giving about a bushel of pears a year. Now, I mentioned that an important thing that they used pears for was something called perry, which is a drink that's manufactured the same way that apple cider is. And that was a popular drink in the 17th and 18th century. The pear is known historically as the Endicott pear. It's a type of sugar pear, and its official name is Bon Chrétien. And the pear is kind of russet looking, kind of greenish, relatively small, and it doesn't taste very good, and I can tell you that from experience. They still have pears on this tree every year. And let me show you a picture from the 1920s. Actually, let me show you an older picture. This was in a magazine in 1852 showing the pear tree with somebody looking at it and a small fence around it. This tree has been written up in all sorts of scientific journals because of its age. Now, pear trees usually do go for a number of 100 years, but this one is actually remarkable. And then let me show you a picture from the 1920s, and you can get a feel for how desolate this pear tree was. Here it is, and you can, if you take a close look, you can see that there's nothing around it. It's just open space. And this pear tree was there for any kind of weather events or whatever. And the fellow with the beard standing by it is William C. Endicott, a great, great, great grandchild of John Endicott, who, among other things, owned Glen Magna and was an antiquarian. And here he's pictured in this very fine picture in the 1920s with the pear tree. And here's a picture of what one of the pears look like. They're about that big, and like I said, every year we get at least a bushel or two of the pears from this tree. Not very appetizing, but very historic. And when you take a bite, you're biting the same pear that John Endicott in the 1630s would have also been biting into. Mass General took over much of the property. They asked me if I would put together some pictures and some text that they would have in the foyer of their building, remembering and commemorating the Endicott Pear Tree. So if you go into the foyer, you'll be able to see a nice large plaque that has these pictures. And then in, I think it was 2011, the Governor Endicott Genealogical Group put up a small sign, and that's located over to the right. We'll get a close-up of it a little bit later, which just commemorates the tree. So this tree, even though it's very difficult to find today, and probably only a couple hundred people in Danvers have actually ever seen it, because it's kind of squirreled away, is actually a national treasure. It's really our living link with the past, and that's so remarkable. And when Mass General came here, they got rid of the lousy-looking jail-like fence and put up the one that you see now, the black, tall fence. And pomology is the science of fruit cultivation. And they hired someone from a tree service to come and take care of the tree so that it continue to be healthy. Even though it's in a bowl now, that at least allows us to have it somewhat protected. And there are trees behind it which also help it too. But this gnarly old tree is really our touchstone of something that was actually living when the first settlers from Europe came here to America. So I hope sometime you'll be able to come down here and take a look at it, if you can find it, and know that you're looking at something that's really the oldest item of contact with the Puritans that still exists in Danvers.